Tom Grasso lives here in Brattleboro. Tom's a senior advisor to the Environmental Defense Fund and faculty at Marlborough College's MBA in Managing for Sustainability program. Tom has over 20 years experience working for social and environmental change, from energy and climate change and ocean fisheries to ecosystem and natural resource management. Tom's course at Marlborough focuses on structural reforms in the law as it relates to the United States' long-standing reliance on coal. He recently worked with activists from Appalachia and across the country to build a strategy to ban mountaintop removal coal mining and to prevent other destructive coal mining practices. So very happy to have you here. Thanks for doing this. I was hoping that maybe to get things started, you could give us a little bit of context for this very kind of targeted story that we just saw, maybe a little bit of bigger picture and good news.
Yeah.
Maybe there must be some good news, and
well, I think the film is actually very good news. The way it started out made me feel like I was going to hear the same old story that I've heard about coal mining for a long time, and I was really happy to hear that this was a pretty happy ending in many ways. When I first was listening and watching the film, it reminded me of a book that was written back in the early '60s by a gentleman named Harry Caudill. I don't know if you're familiar with a book called Nighttime Comes to the Cumberland. And it is the story of the Cumberland Plateau and how the natural resources of that area, Appalachia, have been basically destroyed for the last 150 years. And the story about the coal companies coming and tricking the landowners into leasing their property is something that happened 125 years ago. So at first I thought, oh man, we're going to hear the same story again. But in this instance, I think it was a good ending to the story, which to me shows that people can actually really make change if they want to. I've been doing, as Danny said, I've been doing environmental work for over 20 years. I'm trained as an environmental lawyer, and was most interested in the litigation side of things, but have gotten more involved in sort of creative problem solving, working with communities in the last 10 or 15 years. And I had the great privilege a couple of years ago, just before the Obama administration came in, a professor up at Middlebury College invited me to facilitate a discussion of anti-coal activists from all over the country. And we were in West Virginia for a few days, and then again in Washington, to talk about building a strategy to fight mountaintop removal. And it was great for me because I had spent about 10 years doing international work, and I came back to American-made activists, environmental activists, which is where I got my start. And it was really inspiring because it was a group of young people and old people, and they all got together and came up with a great strategy, which some of you may be familiar with. It was called 100 Days of Action. First 100 days of the Obama administration, every day there was an action that was put up on a website that was something about coal and the problems with coal and what to do about it. And it ended in a big direct action that brought folks like Bill McKibben and others down to Washington. And they basically went to the coal-fired power plant that provides electricity for Capitol Hill, and staged a demonstration there. It was pretty powerful, and it got picked up all over the country. So I'd actually like to hear from all of you what you thought about the film, and maybe just one word that sort of captures what you felt about watching the movie, and maybe one word that you heard or one phrase you heard in the film that sort of sticks with you. And maybe, Peter, I'll ask you to start if you wouldn't mind. Something you heard in the film that resonated with you, and then one word yourself something, an emotion or a feeling or anything.
I'll pass.
You want to pass? Okay. Anybody? I can start. The one phrase I heard, and there was something about you can't regulate an abomination. I thought that was a great line. I was also sort of struck by the use of religion in this on both sides. which I think is kind of an interesting to think about that in the context of a lot of things we hear about religion in the news today and justifications for things like war. So I was kind of intrigued by that. But as I was going through it, I thought, you know, one word that came to mind was that sadness was something that really struck me. But by the end of the film, I felt very hopeful. And for me, what's interesting about that is I worked in a lot of what you know people call the developing world, where natural resource extraction is very much like what we see in the coal fields of the United States. The real value of those resources don't stay in those places. They go to big cities, they go to big companies, and there's a lot of real parallels between the coal fields of the United States and places like Africa, where the resources are taken from there to fuel the economies of Europe and the United States, and today China. So I'm hopeful. I guess hopeful would be the word for me. Watching this, because it is about a single community that actually did something very, very successfully. Anybody else want to share a thought?
I think the tenacity.
Tenacity.
Yeah, and
it's a great word.
The commitment, which, especially that the woman had, and her ability to go to the various people and appeal to what was important to them.
Right. That's great. So,
and she got support.
Mm-hmm. Support is another good one. Tenacity and support.
Well, I'll be a little bit of a downer. I'm a native Kentuckian. I know all those people in that film. I'm an expatriate. I left Kentucky last time, 2001, and lived abroad, and now I'm up here because this is as close as I can be an American be abroad. And you have no cult, thank God. I do know all those people. I know the filmmakers.
So you're from Williams Creek? Or near there?
I'm from county northeast of there, Godfrey County. There is no coal, it's just natural gas, which is its own terrible impact. Last time I was in Kentucky, I was working as an archaeologist, surveyor on cultural resource management issues. I've surveyed many of these strip lines where you're not allowed to go, where it's trespassing, you'll be shot. I've been, it's like the moon. It's in West Virginia, Kentucky, it's the moon. I worked in Texas and Louisiana in natural gas and oil fields. It's the same thing. This film, I'm glad it's going to get loud, it's going to make people feel good on the other end of the spectrum, the left end of the spectrum. But it was contrived by, it was done, they didn't say anywhere in there, but it was all Appalshah people, which is a media organization in Eastern Kentucky. I know those people are good people. They all know each other. It's just like, I'm sorry, I used to be a filmmaker too, so I see how to put it together.
Well,
it's
film is a story, right?
Yeah, it is.
So there's a lot of stories there, I'm sure, that weren't told, but I think
it's really ugly there now. It's really ugly, and it's getting uglier. But I'm in Vermont, so in case you're also my family's still there. 2 years. That's the first one to leave.
Yeah, well, it is. It's not to paint it as overly optimistic. There are serious problems that have existed for over 100 years. You're absolutely right, but we have to start somewhere.
Since the Europeans knocked down the first tree, since Andy Boone killed the first bear.
Right, there you go.
And the landlords have had the hand of it.
Yeah, Peter.
I'm somewhat in agreement with this gentleman. I lived in Eastern Kentucky, not too far from where I think this is, from 1967 to 1970. And this presentation avoids a lot of the realities. And it may be exactly what happened there, but first of all, I didn't see the level of poverty that I think exists in that whole region. Just grinding poverty. I didn't see the level of resistance on the part of the coal company. You know, Harlan, Kentucky used to be called Bloody Harlan because people tried to unionize there and people got killed. And that tradition of violence breaking out is just below the surface. I didn't really see that in this. I mean, I saw a lot of feeling good over the steps that were taken and moving forward, but I didn't see anybody fearful or what was going to happen with the design and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So the level of poverty, the level of violence, and the really incredible devastation of the land. I mean, I sort of doubt those people would be happy if, even if they did deep mining, you know, which that was a long time ago now. It's been passed by the strip mining and mountaintop removal, but it all winds up down at the bottom of the creek and spoils the land and the water.
Right. Thanks, Peter. Yep.
I think the other point that was sort of glossed over in this film, but touched on sort of at the end of the film, is this whole issue of what happens when you burn this stuff. I was just hearing someone on the radio talking about 350 is the important number. That's the number of parts per million of atmospheric carbon dioxide that leaves the Earth sustainable. And we're at 390 right now. And I'm really saddened and frustrated that we don't seem to have the will in terms of making policy at a national level to deal with this issue as an urgent, existential issue. If people understood how critical it is to not burn this stuff, these issues wouldn't come to play at all. People wouldn't be mining it. But I think this little community is kind of squeezing the balloon. It'll go somewhere else. They'll go to Wyoming or Colorado and strip mine there where it's cheaper if they can avoid litigation in communities that are less resistant to it. I'm kind of pessimistic about the future if we can't get some kind of consensus here that we really have to stop using so much of this kind of fuel to power our economy. It's going to kill us. And that's the part that really disturbs me about, or it leaves me unsettled, watching this and seeing that the real issue, at least for me, was just kind of touched on at the very end.
So, Tom, with that in mind, what are these strategies to end mountaintop removal coal mining?
Well, I take a slightly different approach, which is, these are long-term problems that have sort of been created over, hundreds of years. Frankly, this country exists because we first started taking people from Africa to create an economy to exist here, and we still rely on natural resources from other places, and Europe is the same way. And it's not something that's going to change overnight. And so I look at a film like this as, believe me, I've been doing this work for over 20 years. It doesn't have a lot of the details in it, but I think for me, the question is, what is going to motivate people to want to change the way that they live? And telling the same sad story about the plight of the planet so far really hasn't gotten people to do it yet. So to me, I think we need some stories that are going to convince people that they're empowered to actually make real change. And that's what this film says to me. And I think as Americans want immediate gratification as well. We want to see things change immediately, and then we want to forget about it. And that's not the kind of change that needs to happen. And I'm okay with realizing that I have a job to do here while I'm here, and I may not see the fruits of all my labor, but that's the way it is. So there are a lot of strategies out there, but I guess the first one starts with sort of a realization of what it is you're going to do yourself to make a difference, and in this instance, with mountaintop removal, there's an organization which you're probably familiar with, ilovemountains.org, and you can go to their website and click in your zip code and find out whether or not the electricity that you're purchasing right now is actually coming from mountaintop coal. And you'll be very surprised if you put in the zip code, this electricity in this room is somehow related to mountaintop removal. So what does that mean? What are you going to do about it? I would suggest two things. One, you have to write a letter to your power company saying, I don't want this as a source of my electricity. And two, I would encourage you to write a letter to the friends and family of, what's your name? Ephraim. To say that you're supporting the work that they're trying to do to make a better economy in where they live. So those are two things you can do. And then see where it goes from there. Everybody has their own path to make change, to follow, and I can't, I don't think there's one solution to the problem. And I think it's going to take everybody making a little bit of a change at a time. And I think we have to tell positive stories, because if we don't, what's the future that we want people to see? To me, that story, even though it's imperfect, is a story about what I'd like other people to be doing in their communities. And I think there's great stories here in Brattleboro that we can share. It's one of the reasons I moved here with my family, is because of the great things that Brattleboro does as a community. And probably one of the reasons even why you moved here as well. So, but it doesn't mean we're perfect. But telling a positive story is really important to getting people to get out of their easy chairs, literally, and do something different. So, Margaret.
I have a question. I'm from Western Pennsylvania, which is also a really big coal strip mining place. And it's my understanding that there, when you buy a piece of land, you're not buying the mineral rights that are underneath, and a company can just come in to your farm or wherever and mine it, and they have to give you some sort of like compensation. I don't know what the value estimation is, and that doesn't seem to be the case there. Those people actually have the power of the minerals, but
well, it really
is
depends.
The only place that
It really depends, because we're talking about actually this actual surface of, when you talk about this is strip, and when they talked about subsurface rights, it was actually mining underground, so you could still.
No, there are farms in my community where the farmer didn't own the mineral rights.
Right.
And they strip mined a farm. I mean, it's not a farm anymore. It's just dirt.
It depends on what's written in the deed, really.
So it's like an individual thing. It's not a statewide thing.
Well, state law does control some of it. But some of these laws have were changed. Some of the deeds were written 50 to 100 years ago, and so those rights still exist. And they are interpreted different ways. Like where the property I have here in Brattleboro, several of my neighbors have water rights because there was a spring coming from my property. So it's a part of my deed that says they have water rights, but they're not being used anymore because we're all on town water. So, but it's a vestige of past property law that still exists. But in the case of the mining companies, they can use it. So, Peter.
This seems obvious in a way to me, but somebody at some point in the past, as Tom said, sold those mineral rights to a coal company. And often the water rights and the timber rights and a lot of other things too. That's how they don't have the rights now to pass that on.
It's already in their deeds.
It was sold often for just pennies on the acre, just very, very low money. And people thought, oh, that's something they're going to take out of the ground at the time with deep mining, and it won't be disruptive, and we'll still be able to farm the surface, and the good bottom soil will be there, and so forth. But somebody gave away those rights, or it's actually sold to a coal company a long time ago.
Yeah. Danny.
Tom, I want to come back to a question about activism in general, and because I'm really interested in your perspective, the experience you've had, Coming back to something that we've sort of been talking about, which is this something that we should be happy about and the kind of story that we want to put out there and that we're happy they've made a documentary about and word's going to get out there? Or because a big part of me feels like that may even be counterproductive, where you seem to be, taking a lot of solace in having
The
a story like
counterproductive
this.
side, explain it to me.
Well,
I mean, I'm not questioning. I just want to understand it.
I feel like there are certain issues that require action, but depending on what the issue is, the action that's required, is of a certain scale.
Right.
And the issue that I think a lot of us are concerned about here as it relates to mountaintop removal coal mining and the impact in terms of climate change.
Climate change, right.
You're talking about a huge multi-tentacled, systemic problem.
Right.
Where I don't think what they do in this little creek, I mean, it's nice for them. They protected a watershed, and they preserved a certain livelihood and so on. That's a nice story, but to me, it has like nothing to do with the bigger issue. And in fact, if you kind of go home feeling good, like there was a little win.
Right.
I feel like the only win that can be had when the problem is as big and complicated has to be a large scale, like political. It has to happen on a large scale political level, not on an individual.
So ultimately, yeah, that large collective thing has to happen. But if you look at history at how those large global change things happen, they didn't happen from the top. It didn't happen because somebody in Washington or Brussels or New York decided that they were gonna make a big social change. It happened because you built a grassroots campaign. They didn't always call it grassroots campaigning, but that's fundamentally what has to happen. And my feeling about climate change is absolutely, I've worked on climate change. It's a huge global problem, no doubt about it. But to me, it's the grand symptom of a what I feel is a very flawed economic system that we have that relies on externalizing the environmental and social costs of basically taking natural resources and abusing them and abusing the people who rely on those natural resources for a living and grinding them into a global economy that allows us to live the lives that we do. So climate change, to me, yes, it's a problem, but only because it's a grand symptom. And what these people are doing here are basically the seeds of what needs to happen literally all over the world. But first here in the United States, because we're the people that everybody follows. And if we don't change the way we live our lives, and if they don't find another economic model besides coal, the climate change issue is not going to be solved. It just is not going to be solved. So to me, this is the seeds of change. And we don't change what we do here in the United States about the way our economy is run. China is mimicking everything that we've done to industrialize, and they're doing it better, faster, and at a magnitude that makes what we've done in this country look like nothing. And it's not because they're bad people. They want to be just like us, and they're incredibly hardworking people, just like we were in the Industrial Revolution, and so they have every right to do that. But and they're not going to change if they think that they can do it just as easily as we've done it. So I agree. These are big problems that need big solutions, but you don't grow a big tomato plant unless you plant the seed, and we have to plant the seed. And to me, this is about planting the seeds of change. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I hear you, and it is convincing. I just wish I had a clearer picture in my mind of how this little action here leads to something bigger.
Right.
It leads to where it needs to be. I don't get how that happens.
Yeah.
It seems like maybe that's an isolated incident, and it was a nice story, and that's the end of it.
Well,
It's not isolated. The Kentuckians for the Commonwealth organization that was funding that whole meeting that you saw in the middle of the film works throughout Kentucky and these communities. That's just one nut on the tree.
Right.
This is happening all over Kentucky, and same thing in West Virginia, and into Pennsylvania now, Western Pennsylvania. Hopefully it'll go into fracking soon, whatever it is, with the natural gas in Pennsylvania and New York State. but they're all connected. But they didn't tell you that. You didn't get that out of the film from the filmmaker's craft.
And that's reassuring. I mean, because that to me is what,
There's a huge
that's where
correlation, yeah.
these small stories become really relevant in to the bigger issue.
You're right, and I think that's true about this is just one very small story, but there's a lot of those stories happening out there. Not necessarily all successful, but the experience I had meeting activists from all over the country was just incredibly inspiring because it was 50 stories like this, 50 inspiring stories from Navajo and Hopi women in the Southwest to folks in North Dakota to people in North Carolina to West Virginia, even a woman from Massachusetts who was working with anti-coal activists to try to explain to people in Massachusetts why they shouldn't be they should be supporting Cape Wind and not powering their summer homes on Cape Cod from strip mountaintop removal. There's a lot of that interconnectedness happening, and it's really neat to see. So it's hard to capture that in a one-hour film.
Of course,
so.
you got to tell a certain story. So to the extent that we may be interested in finding out more about these strategies that are afoot to...
I would go to ilovemountains.org as the
Okay.
place to start, because you can definitely check out to see how whether or not you're connected to mountaintop removal. And for those of you who haven't read it, I would read Nighttime Comes to the Cumberland, because it's an incredible history, not just of the Cumberland Plateau, but it's a great story of really how this country made itself on the backs of people in that part of the world. And it's a story that has been replicated in a lot of other places around the world as well. So it's beautifully written. It's definitely sad, but it's beautifully written book. So I would recommend that. So,
Tom, I thank you so much, and thank you all of you. Pleasure as always. Please keep coming back for these screenings. It's great to have you here and to hear your thoughts about them. And
thanks for inviting me, Danny.
Yeah,
it's great.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Tom.